Um, so yeah, it's a pretty large brief in the sense of trying to cover the entire criminal procedure code, and what happens from the stage of filing an FIR is something I'll try and think till the time it reaches courts, and I think maybe just a rough run through of some of the rights that people as accused and what you have in court. Um, yeah, so basically, like we always have this big maxim which says ignorance of the law is no excuse. So if not for yourself, surely any kind of knowledge that you get of the law is to, one, of course, if any time anyone will have a problem, but also in the case of domestic violence against women, which is the first one I will try and take up, is to help a lot of people, because as a lawyer and as a lawyer who's been doing a lot of human rights and women's rights cases, family law cases, I've been surprised at the number of cases that that come to my office, which somehow initially, at least, I mean, of course, we knew it takes place, domestic violence, as the aims and objectives at the beginning of the Act says. It's called Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, came into effect 2006. Says that it is an unseen, unheard of crime, but it is very much prevalent. Okay. So of course the government of India got pushed to pass this law because they were signatories to CEDAW, which is the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And once you're party to that, then you have to bring out domestic laws that are in consonance with what are the things under CEDAW. And one of the things was we didn't have a domestic violence act dealing only with domestic violence. There are some areas which are which could have worked, I mean, could have had improvement, but I think that like any good law, if it is not used, if it is not also given the backup and support, and of course if people do not push the governments, because a lot of this law depends on how effectively the various bodies that are supposed to act to help our women in domestic violence situations work, that makes the law effective. So I'll explain what exactly the law is. So first and foremost, so this is, if any time a woman is having any kind of violence which takes place in society, like for example sexual harassment at the workplace, or they are assaulted by a neighbor, anything that takes place outside the home, then the law which is used is called the Indian Penal Code, or specific like sexual harassment at the workplace if you are harassed at the workplace. This law is only to deal with violence that takes place in the confines of a home. Okay, that means in your marital home. If you are married and you come to your husband's place, as in all major situations largely that happens is that in the patriarchal setup that we are, the woman gets married or has a live-in relationship or whatever and they come to the husband's house. Okay, so that would be considered your marital home, or the home that you are brought in when you are married. But of course the law doesn't always insist that it has to be only women who are in a marital situation. And in fact this is the section that caused a lot of controversy, trying to say, oh, now this is not Indian traditions, from a lot of the traditionalists saying how are you recognizing live-in relations. Well, of course it's a progressive law. So, and the second thing was, sometimes in Goa is the only state in the whole country that has compulsory registration of marriage. Like, I mean, the church won't marry you unless you have your civil registration. And of course even among the Hindus it is like, I mean, the only thing recognized since 1910 is a civil registration of marriage. Now in the rest of the country, of course, they only go to a temple or the mosque, or even perhaps in some places the church, and therefore they didn't have a document to prove their marriage. And I know that when, even as a lawyer in the initial years, when we had to file cases for maintenance and we had to prove that she is married, we had to ask them to bring their marriage invitation card, or bring their certificates, or bring an uncle or a relative that attended the marriage, and there was so much of hassles. Whereas in Goa, you just show the marriage certificate, proof enough, married on so and so day, this is the registration certificate. So anyway, now under the Act, it also recognizes people who lived in the nature of marriage. So the law has undergone some changes, because sometimes there have been some won't say crazy cases, but yeah, pretty crazy in the sense they've actually not lived for many they've lived for about a week. You can't call that, one wouldn't call that like a live-in relationship, so the Supreme Court has amended that, given some guidelines to say it has to be for a considerable amount of time to be called a live-in, but yes, you don't have to have a formal marriage certificate to come under the Domestic Violence Act. So domestic violence anyway is a crime, because it causes physical and psychological harm, and it's of course a violation of your human rights. So first and foremost, this law is for women. Sadly, someone asked me, is there something for men too? Well, if there are cases of men who are being abused or beaten up by their wives, they would have to use the IPC. This law says is protection of women from domestic violence, and of course, obviously, legislature in its wisdom realized from statistics that the larger people who are facing this trauma is women, and therefore they thought it fit to bring out a law which is most gender specific. And of course, it was also, as usual, every time gets challenged in court to say how come women get this privilege, why only a domestic violence for women, why not men? And of course, it was thrown out because if you know the Constitution, even though Article 14 of the Constitution says equality of law and equality before law, equality for everyone, Article 15 of the Constitution gives legislature the power and the privilege to pass any laws if they find for women and backward classes. So under that Article 15 is what you will have sexual harassment at the workplace, the Domestic Violence Act, or any kind of laws that are protective of women would come on the special privilege that you have under Article 15. So we are pretty much covered in the sense that there is no problem with having a law that is gender specific in the sense of with women. Now, therefore, right at the definition, when you have the law and you have the definition clauses, it says that the person who is the complainant is called the aggrieved woman, and the person who is against whom the complaint is filed is the respondent. Okay, so right at the beginning, you can make out that this law is not a criminal law. When I say criminal, in the sense it doesn't, largely all the reliefs that you get under this law are civil in nature, which I will explain what are the laws. So you don't invite a criminal punishment as an imprisonment for this law, largely, except there is one particular section which is section 31, which I will explain later, under what circumstances you can use the respondent husband and his relatives face penal consequences. So the respondent can be the husband, or will necessarily be the husband, because it's the male person there, only a male person can be, and his relatives. So because we live in India where we often live with our relatives, with the mother-in-law and the sister-in-law, pretty much in a joint family. So it can be, if she's creating trouble, the mother-in-law or the sister-in-laws, it can be the husband with the in-laws, could be all respondents. Okay. Now the woman, and this law has taken a lot of things into consideration, in the sense that women do not like to go to the police station. Women do not, and I'm really, really surprised that quite often, she comes battered to you for help, but the first thing she will say is, don't put him in, don't imprison him, and I know that most women also have normally filed any kind of a complaint really when she's reached the end of her tether. It's not like the first slap. I've never had a case where first slap or the first abuse or the first insult brings her before a court or before any advocate. So so the definition clauses right at the beginning says aggrieved woman, that she need not go to the police station. Though you have the police as one of the important people or functionaries under the act, he is not the main person, because of this understanding that women really, really do not like to go to a police station. They still find it very threatening, they still find it very uncomfortable, and they somehow think police means they'll put him inside. So that is the least or the last alternative. So in the act they found an intermediary, in the sense that the case will ultimately go to court. Even the women do not like court, because ultimately you need to have a judgment or some kind of a force of law for the husband to act, whether to say stay away from the workplace or whatever is the orders that you would get. So the person who would act under this act is a very important person called the protection officer. Okay, now a protection officer could be anybody. Like in the rest of the country, they've appointed permanent full-time protection officers who does the entire thing for the woman, in the sense of listening to her complaint, putting it in some kind of a format, taking it to the court, and doing various other things which I will explain what can she get under the act. Now, as I told you, and I started with by saying that an act is as good as the backup it gets from the government and the backup it gets from society, in the sense that if we don't demand, or people also don't demand, or the act just becomes just another act. And this is really a good act that is, at least in Goa, pretty much, or I think even the rest of the country, I would literally say died, or pretty much not acting, because of the protection officers who are, one, not trained, and for Goa at least, the protection officers are every block development officer in every taluka. Now a BDO, if you would know, has got nothing less than 20 other jobs that he does, starting from stray dogs to stray cattle to illegal huts, houses, to law and order. And he actually, I remember once, right at the beginning of the act, when they appointed the BDOs, we protested as women's groups, and people who are concerned, saying two major objections. One is BDOs would work again Monday to Friday, because they're government officials. What happens on a Saturday and Sunday, the major days when domestic violence takes place, the weekend where we have alcoholism, binge drinking, etc. And they said, take what you get for the time being, we will see it, and it'll never ever happen. So like, okay, thank God for like literally telling you, take something better than nothing. So BDOs were thrust upon us. And the BDOs themselves were, as protection officers, were so reluctant, they themselves protested, saying that don't dump women on us now. Like, they actually said that in no uncertain terms. We are dealing with 20 other jobs, and, we can't deal with it. Well, perhaps a few sensitive protection officers would do a job if they were given a little backup. Because frankly, listening to a woman's complaint can be very emotionally taxing. Because, she comes, I know, because, as a sensitive women lawyer also, when they come to my office, they start by telling me, shall I start right from the beginning? Which I know it means the next 2 hours at least, And of course, she cries and she's sobbing, and, I have always a big box of tissues in my office, because I know that, that's the place she can cry. So, which BDO, honestly, can give 2 hours of his time and keep a box of tissues in his office and listen to her coherently and put it down in any kind of a format? So, for these various reasons, first and foremost, the first point of contact of the woman is really bad. The second important thing that the Act has made possible, or should if it works well, is to have shelter homes, and to have counselors, trained counselors, and to have family welfare experts, all of which would make the Act work. So all of these are again not there. They don't have trained counselors. They did appoint fresh students, young kids. Like, if you have ever heard of this 181 helpline now, started by the government with much fanfare, and they've got a huge building. 181, if for anyone perhaps who don't know, is a crisis helpline. And the health minister very proudly said, oh, we've opened up this crisis helpline, and and we have all these people. And when I went to do a training there, I was really shocked to see just fresh out of BA psychology, young kids who have, 18, 19-year-olds dealing with women who are distressed, who are, suicidal, really poor things, whatever. So, therefore you needed trained psychologists. So the government have never appointed. We've given hundreds of letters to them saying that yes, we have to train them, etc. But the second important functionary of the Domestic Violence Act would be where women say that, divorce, please don't even talk of that word. We want to save our marriage. We just want someone to listen to us or to listen to him and see what can be done. So again, counselors is what is envisaged under the act. And the third one is, of course, shelter homes, just for that time, just for a little break, halfway shelter homes. So what the government did was find out various, existing homes that provided such kind of relief, kept women in distress, and said, now you all will be notified as under the act and we will pay you the money, and you all are the shelter homes that are notified. So, well, people thought, okay, fine, they promised a whole lot of money, which of course never happened, because the government of Goa is one of the only governments in the whole country which has not allocated any money for the PWD. So many of the convents or places that used to keep women said we used to get our payments after 6 months, and after repeatedly going to the department to ask for our money. So again, they are not willing to continue, shelter homes, halfway homes. And again, we are back to square one, keeping the women in our homes, in our personal homes, which is really not the best thing to do, because women sometimes, due to, after they go back, and I'm telling from personal experiences, sometimes get, their husbands kind of cajole them to tell who was the one who helped you, where did you stay, and, out of fear, out of threat, they tell the name. And I've had my house stoned, I had my, repeatedly threatened by husbands, etc., etc. So, which is really not the nice thing. If you had a home which is government protected, would have been so much more easier. Okay, so what is domestic violence then? So everyone knows domestic violence would be any kind of threats that a woman means omissions or commission or the conduct of the respondent which anyway harms, injures, endangers the health, safety, limb, life and well-being. So it encompasses quite a lot actually, not only omission and commission, whether mental or physical, and if he even threatens to do so, doesn't have to be actually committed. So if he threatens that I will break your arm, or I will see that you don't, whatever, leave the house, etc., all of that would constitute domestic violence. So, and the definition is really a very good definition, in the sense it's pretty broad. It doesn't only cover physical, which is the normal thing. Everyone says, does he beat you up? Is the first question. Any woman who comes to your office, you ask, oh, so he beats you up, then she says, no, he doesn't. Because of widespread alcoholism in Goa, that is largely the thought that comes to mind is physical abuse. Well, physical abuse is a form of domestic violence, but so is sexual abuse, which is, I think, a very good part of the definition, which is any conduct of a sexual nature that abuses, humiliates, degrades or violates the dignity of women. So if you have, for example, forced sexual intercourse or forcing a woman to watch pornography, it would constitute sexual abuse, And I can tell you that this is one kind of sexual abuse that I've had a number of cases, maybe because of easy availability of pornography and easy availability of sexual content with a click of a button, that I've had cases where the husbands are forcing their wives to watch pornography, and if they don't, then physical violence. At any time of the night, and more than that also, kind of, I remember the case of this woman who had a mental breakdown because he watched a lot of perverted sexual intercourse, which was shown types of intercourse that you can do, and he wanted her to do all those types, and he says, let's try new things and stuff, and she was obviously not mentally prepared for any of it, and she suffered a mental breakdown and was admitted in IPHB, and then the whole story came out. But also forcing to watch pornography. There was also this very tragic case where he forced her to watch, pornography, and then she said no. And then not only did she, he abused her and physically abused her, but he did a very other terrible thing, tragic thing, in the sense he just took all the kids' books. I don't know what was this kind of nonsense, and set them aflame in front of the kids, And we had such a lot of trouble trying to put the kids to counseling, etc., etc. But it started with her refusing to watch pornography, which he insisted she should watch. The third one, of course, is verbal emotional, which is the largest part of the kind of domestic abuse. Many women that come say that abusive words or the taunting words or the comments that they pass on a daily basis, right? It can start from your lack of knowledge of cooking, to the way you look, to your manners, to not having a child, to not having a male child. It can be anything. And so verbal uh, emotional abuse is a kind of abuse under the act. And I think largely, if you look at even domestic violence acts of the rest of the world, they would have these three: verbal, emotional, sexual, and physical. But an additional one which we have, which is very, very good, is economic abuse. So if, for example, the husband takes all the salary, which is not very uncommon, I mean, the case that we have, like, zero balance when she comes to you, and she says my salary was straight away taken over by him, given to the in-laws, and then he decided how it would be spent, or depriving you of your entitlements, in the sense of taking over your personal belongings and selling it. I decided I need money, so I'll sell your laptop, I'll sell your cupboard, whatever. So your gold, of course, often pawned, often given in to the banks because he needed money. So these are the four kinds of domestic violence: the physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, and economic is a very important part of the definition clauses. Okay? Now, who can act, and what does she do if she faces any of these forms of domestic violence? As I told you, the protection officer was the main important person, but you also have the police. It's not that the police are without any powers. You can go to the police, who in turn would, of course, send you to the protection officer. Then, of course, you have the judge, who will finally pass the judgment, and the service providers, who are the counselors, family welfare experts, and people who have the homes, or will run the homes for women in distress. Okay. Now, as soon as you go to the protection officer, what does he do? Uh, he has to file out what is called a domestic incident report. And I can tell you, the act was designed knowing that women find it difficult to put down their thoughts and put down a lot of abuse. So they made it simple by having annexures to the act. So this domestic incident report is what's called, they have three forms actually: form 1, form 2, form 3, which every BDO or protection officer should have in his possession. Now, it's a form which makes it so simple, in the sense that they've given a pretty exhaustive list of the kind of violence one would suffer. Let's assume physical. So they will, boxes which say, do you face kicking, slapping, actual violence with a stick, or where, which part of. So it's like so exhaustive. When you say verbal violence, again an exhaustive list. Does he abuse you verbally? What is the kind of abuse? Is he harassing you for not having a child, for not bringing dowry? Is he insulting you for your character, your caste, whatever? So that so the BDO or the protection officer has to only literally tick mark these boxes, and I really sometimes think, how difficult is it? But then it is a pretty exhaustive list, so he has to keep asking her and questioning her about all of these things. So once he ticks marks the entire form, then the form 2 is the one which is addressed to the judge, and there the judge is told, this is the kind of domestic violence he's facing. Now this is what I want. Again, it's a tick mark form 2, wherein you ask the judge what you want under the act. So what can you get under the act? First, of course, is protection, right? Because the act says protection, and I say it's a very good act because I remember when it was passed. 1 year later, a whole lot of women's activists had a celebratory meeting in Delhi. Let's celebrate this law because it's such a good law, and it's our law. It's our law in the sense a lot of women's groups contributed many sections into the act, so they felt it was very much not really legislative. We gave them a law to see what we want. There are some areas which, as I said to you, are not the best, but which perhaps would need amendment, but largely. So what can you get? Protection, and we called it a single window system act. Why is it called a single window system? Because initially, and I still remember even when I started my law practice many years ago, if a woman wanted protection, there was no law. So, and she didn't want divorce, She wanted to stay in the same house, and I thought, like, how can this be possible? The only option was private, which she was not willing to do, you know. Then, if you wanted maintenance, she said, I don't have any money, so where do I go? So we would have the section called Section 125 under the Criminal Procedure Code. So we would have to file under 125 for maintenance. If we wanted shelter, then we, or any other protection, we would have to use another law. And then it was like, or then if we wanted separation, then it was another law. So everything we had to file 3-4 cases, which in different courts, which was very, very difficult, and very monetarily also very difficult for the woman, taxing for the lawyer and everything. So under this law now, you can get what a woman facing domestic violence largely would require. First, protection at her place, at her sister's place, at her parental place, wherever she decides to go. Quite often she goes to her mother's house, and the mothers used to get scared. Oh, please don't come here because the husband will come screaming here, his family will come yelling at her house. So please don't bring her here, please keep her in a convent, please keep her somewhere else, So now protection, not only if she decides to stay in her marital home, she can decide husband not to come in particular section of the thing which gets demarcated by the court. In room 1, for example, he will not come there, or his relatives may not come there. Or if she decides to stay elsewhere, then not to come there. She can ask for protection at the school, which is one of the major areas where the husbands go and create trouble. Like they go to try to pick up the kids and stuff like this, and it becomes extremely difficult to how to stop him from coming to the school. So wherever you want your protection, within 100 meters of the school, within 100 meters of your workplace, that's another area they would normally come and create trouble. Of course, in all cases, they find such ingenious ways to subvert the law. I remember this case of a woman who used to work on a fifth story of a building in Tangent. She was working for some insurance company. And the husband used to come there repeatedly outside her office and create such a ruckus and, all kinds of nonsense. So we got a protection order, will not come within 100 meters of her workplace. So we thought, good enough, he's not going to come. Next morning he was there at the lift of that building, and he says, I'm not coming to your workplace, but no one can stop me to go onto the first floor where there was some government office of some town and country. I'm going there to, put some application or something like this. So it was so very difficult because he was still there outside the lift because this thing said outside her workplace. Then and you really cannot prevent him from going to make some applications to any government authorities, if he wanted to. So we tried some other things. So, they come out and always one step, smarter if you try and get some kind of objections. But well, you can get protection even from communicating with you, because that's another way they do hassle you over Facebook or hassle you by making repeated calls. So you can ask the court to prevent him or his relatives from communicating with you over the phone or internet, whatever. And one of the areas where which most of the guys feel really terrible about this act is if you can also get an order to ask the husband to leave his own house if he is not agreeing to, or refusing to act or behave despite an order. So that the husband say, how can, this is my house, I don't have a place to live, how can you ask me to leave my own house? But yes, the court and the section of the law says the court can direct the husband or his relative, not any woman, but only the husband, to leave the house, his own house, if he is not agreeing to the conditions if that applies. So protection is one of the orders you can get. The second order you can get is custody of the child, immediate custody of children. And the law is good in the sense that if you normally look at custody of children, it is largely granted to the mother and to women, because they believe from a lot of studies and a lot of most of the acts, even if you look at Hindu Marriage Act, the Muslim Guardianship and Wards Act, the child below age 6 under the Hindu Minorities Act also would normally go to the mother, because they believe she's the best person to look after a minor child. Even beyond the age of 6, they still believe it's the mother, unless you can prove she's an unfit mother on various counts. So, as I said earlier also, to get custody of the children was such a task, because you didn't have a law. You would still have to go under the Portuguese law and by the time it comes up in court, etc., she would be deprived of her children, and she was not willing to file anything wherein she would not have custody of her children. So you can get custody, is a very good. Husband can get visitation rights, but it's not automatic. He'll have to explain to the court and give his credentials before he gets visitation rights, which I think is good, that he should get visitation rights, but of course under certain conditions. The third right you can get immediate is residence. A very, very good right under the Act, because one of the things that women always never filed is, where will I stay, you know. And most often mothers and families not willing to take her back, and therefore staying in an abusive home was always not the best option. Not, she wasn't protected. So residence is something that you can get, and it's really well worded in the sense which says that whether or not he has got title or a right on that place, meaning in the sense, quite often they say it's not on my name, it belongs to my in-laws, it belongs to, it's really not yet transferred onto his name. Whether it's a rented place, it may not belong to him, but if that is the place that she was brought to after her marriage, it would be considered the marital home, and he would have to either give her an alternate residence or make arrangements for her in that place. In short, she cannot be thrown out of the house because of domestic violence. Okay, so a residence order is an extremely good order that she would get, and of course she would get compensation. Is the fourth right that she would get compensation for damage that he caused, emotional or actual physical. Like for example, if he's broken her arm or caused a fracture which entailed medical, and she spent a lot of money for that, whatever is the cost, he would have to pay. And of course, if he has destroyed her things, which again, smashed, brought a stone, smashed. Last time this woman came to me, she bought something new and he was so annoyed. Why did you buy it without my consent? Why do you need it? And then of course, big argument. We just took the grinding stone and smashed her, her stove that she had, her new oven that she had bought, because it was bought without his consent and stuff like this. So if she decided to file, she could take that cost and then put it as to damage. So the compensation is separate from maintenance, which is again one of the rights you get. So maintenance for herself and her children. And again, if you look at that whole section on maintenance, which is section 20, it's explained what you would get, like clothing and fees and education of the children, etc. Is something that you can get, and you don't have to file separately. So you can get all your reliefs under one. That's why I call it single window act. Protection, residence, maintenance, compensation, custody, which are largely what a woman would, where do I stay? So residence, where my children, like often the husbands, and I tell you hundreds of cases that I've dealt with, you go, you want to go, you go, but I'm not allowing you to take the kids. And that's where the whole tussle, she stays behind because she cannot, think of leaving her kids behind. So these are the 5 things that you would get. So the protection officer, of course, fills up these forms, form 1, form 2, but the most important form is form 3. And what is form 3? The law uses a section which is section 23. You don't have to remember section, but only to say that it gives you something called ex parte ad interim. Little bigger legal words, but nothing very fancy. In the sense, ex parte means don't even wait for the respondent to be brought before the court. Like for example, the first ever case that I filed was a case of a couple wherein he threw her out of the house and he kept the 6-month-old baby behind. He says, I'm not wanting you, but I'm not giving you the baby. And it was a son. And the baby was breastfeeding, So of course, for situations like this, ex parte meaning the court won't even bother to send summons, because the husband has to be brought before the court to answer the allegations made. But in a case like this, ad interim, meaning like right now, I'm thrown out of the house, I need money right now, I can't wait for the judge, and I can't wait for his reply, and I can't wait for an order which can take, 60 days is what the law says. But 60 days I can't wait without my child, I can't wait, 1 month for not having maintenance. So this ex parte ad interim section 23 is if you have emergent situation where you cannot wait, you don't have a place, you don't have a house, you don't have money, you don't have your custody of children, you can ask the court to give you ad interim ex parte reliefs immediately on the same day, that within 2 days, or the day you file it also you can get your relief. And the courts have been very um, good in giving some reliefs and giving much of the reliefs that you can pray for. So, but you have to remember to fill up Form 3, because if you don't pray for ex parte ad interim, the court doesn't believe that you need it urgently, and then the court would do the normal process of sending summons to the respondent, and he would come and then he would file his reply, and then the court perhaps it would take what is called its evidence. All right. Now, the protection officer has many more jobs besides filling up the forms and taking your matter to the court. So you don't even have to bother to go to court, because really the woman doesn't know which judge, which A, B, C, D, E court. And in fact, I often hear people say, "Where is the court? Is it the high court?" Because they think Mapsa is on a slope, so because it's high up, they think it's the high court. I can imagine. I mean, sometimes educated people also call our Mapsa junior most court a high court. We have only one high court, which is in Panjim, Altin, and of course that is also high up, so that is justifiable to call it high court. But they wouldn't know really. And then you have these, magistrates, and then you have A court, B court kind of thing, where it's very complicated where they would go. So the protection officer is supposed to do all of that for you. And the best part is, all women in India have got something called free legal aid, just by the fact that you are a woman. You can drive a Mercedes and come to the court and say, "I'm a woman, I want free legal aid, give me a lawyer." She would get it only on the ground that she's a woman. So this is this act. Of course, there's an act which says this, that people, or no prisoner, or no person who's poor should not get justice for lack of poverty. So if he fills up, normally men can also get legal aid, but they have to show that they are poor or have a particular income level, fill up a form, give an affidavit of their income, and then they would get free legal aid. But women not. Women just say, "I'm a woman," and she would get free legal aid. So using that particular section, the BDO would appoint a lawyer for her and take the matter up into the court. The court would give it a number, domestic violence case number so and so, and the matter would come up in court. And the law itself says that even like the basic thing of, like, you have court fee stamp, and you have a particular format, the courts still use very archaic language, and if you ever have to file some things in the high court, for example, like 2-inch margin on the left, and if there's just 1.5-inch margin, it's objected to and it's marked for objections. So they have then of course the language, the humble petition of the petitioner, shevit as under kind of thing. So they don't bother about stuff like this. A petition with no margins, with Xerox copies, etc. would do. I think the courts have been pretty relaxed about rules of evidence also when it comes to domestic violence. And the law itself says that even the basic court fee, or even copies of the order, which normally you would have to pay maybe 25 rupees for a certified copy of an order, the law itself says that all copies for the women would be given free of cost. So she doesn't even have to pay for those copies of the order. So what does the magistrate do? 60 days is the time given. Doesn't happen, doesn't happen 60 days. Reason being, of course, less judges, less court, overburdening of the magistrates. They don't get points also, that's what I'm told. Like depends on if you dispose of, for example, a criminal case. Magistrates, I didn't know, we got to know of this point system. Magistrates get 10 points. So they are much more wanting to dispose of a criminal matter, because of course at the end of the career, if they have like 100 points, it makes much more sense. So domestic violence has got no points. So why would they, really give it preference if they have 20 matters on the board for that day? Only because perhaps the law says it should get preference. It has to be heard by a lady judge, and it is what is called in-camera trials. What does in-camera mean? Basically, not in front of everyone, because there are sensitive things that the woman has to depose to, bad language, bad words, sexual abuse, which she cannot do. So it happens at the end of the court largely, when other matters are disposed of, so the woman is comfortable, and always with a lady judge. We cannot have all lady staff, but they have said that if you can have as much lady staff So the stenos largely are ladies, and most of we do have a very large lady staff. So I don't think the women are uncomfortable with regard to that. So the magistrate then, of course, within 1 day from receipt of the complaint, he will put it up on board, and 60 days, as I told you, is his deadline to actually dispose of the entire matter. And within a matter of 2 days, he's supposed to send a notice to the respondent. Now again, why there is some discrepancies in this thing, because again the protection officer is the one who's supposed to serve the respondent. So woman is married in Mapsa, but her husband is from Kankon. So again, protection officer is a BDO whose jurisdiction applies only extends to Mapsa. So he has to seek the help of a friendly protection officer from Margaon or from Kankon, he will, and of course, as I told you, the government of Goa has not given any backup. So therefore, he doesn't have money or petrol for taking that jeep or the summons to Margaon or whatever. So they use a lot of their own system. They try to the panchayat secretary and something like this. It is getting served, but yeah, pretty much delayed. Okay, so the reason is, again, if you have a protection officer who's not full time, who's not given backup, who doesn't have a jeep, who doesn't have even a cupboard. I remember one of the grievances is like, where do we keep all these files of hundreds of women who are coming to us? At least allocate a separate cupboard. We can't mix it up with the normal files. Is that asking too much? So they're finding their way and working in a inefficient system, in a system that is not giving them that kind of backup. So they're still doing whatever they can. Now, as I told you, it's a civil law, so there's no punishment largely, because the reliefs that you are getting here is protection, residence, maintenance, compensation, custody. There's nothing criminal in getting a residence order. But what would be the use of an act if you get an order and the guy just still violates it? So there's only one section in that act, which is section 31, which I say is really not the best part of the act, because it says that only violation of a protection order can meet with penal consequences, in the sense that he can get face an imprisonment sentence of up to 60 days and a fine of 20,000 if in case that an order of protection that says do not come to the house, do not come to the school, and yet you have proof that he did come to the school, it comes as violation of a protection order. Section 31 comes into play. And the best part about section 31, in a sense, the good part is that on the sole testimony of the complainant that he has violated an order, the judge is to believe it. Because how do you prove to the court that he did come to the school? She has a phone, maybe she can take a photograph, but difficult if you are asking for the level of proof of a normal criminal case, which is beyond reasonable doubt. So sole testimony of the aggrieved person is sufficient under Article Section 31 to say that he has violated the order for him to face penal consequences. But the bad part of Section 31 is it is only violation of a protection order. So if for example, we get a good order, and which is the major hassle for us under the law, is pay so much per month, 15,000 per month, let's assume. She gets an order of maintenance and is not paying. 31 doesn't come into play. You cannot go to, of course you go to court, you file for execution, there's no arrest largely because the act doesn't say so. You will have to try and attach something of his, if he has a scooter or a bike. Good if it is a government servant or a private thing where you have a fixed salary. Then the law says you can attach his salary, and the order of the court says salary is attached 15,000 directly from his salary into the account of the worker. So well, if he has a salary, then it's okay. But large amount of people who say we're not earning that much, motorcycle pilots or people who are their own companies, there is no way we can prove their salaries. Become very, very difficult. Major violations are lack of payment of the maintenance, and we don't have our Section 31 fall down to. Okay. Second, as I told you also, since we don't, they say that you should have family welfare experts, because judges are not really trained or they can do parental alienation, and they can bribe a child, and can very easily bribe a child, like with good dresses, or with now of course with mobile phones and these kind of things. Chocolates is enough for them to say, I want to live only with my mother or only with my father. And I've had such traumatic cases, where like they've been brought to the court, and of course asked to choose. And if you have a judge who's not trained, they will ask this dumb question: do you want to go to your mother or your father? And really, what would the child say? Don't ask the child to choose. And if the child says both, honestly, I really wonder what the judge would do. Like maybe in the Bible, say that you cut the child in half or something like this. That is not the right question to ask anyway. So they have to be trained, and therefore the judge should have had access to a family welfare expert to put the child to, to ask really what is best for the child. Or for example, the judge decides to counsel the child, and basis on what the child says. Like I remember this, she was just 3, and she was with the father who refused to give the child to her when we had given the child for an overnight, literally Saturday, Sunday, and the child refused to go on Monday to the mother. So the judge said, let me interview the child. So I said, I told her, with due respect, Your Honor, I would really expect that Your Honor would not interview the child, because it's very specialized thing. Send it to Setu or people who are trained. The judge took pretty much umbrage at, like, how are you saying that I'm not good enough? She's a 3-year-old child and stuff like this. I said, well, I'm saying what I have to say, because it is specialized counseling that you need to be with the child. But the child, the court still insisted that she would. And the child, of course, kept insisting she wants to go to the father, not to the mother. And like the judge was not really asking the question, like, very indirectly. So I came in and I told the judge, may I ask just a few questions? Very indirectly. So I just parried the questions to the child, and I just asked her, so what did your father give you today? Like, very, and she said so sweetly, she did a little pirouette in that judge's room, and she said, he gave me this new dress, and then she said, and he's going to give me a box of chocolates later. Like, luckily she added that thing. So, like, I told the judge, things like this, like, how can you even believe, and what exactly is the child saying, why she doesn't want to go to the mother? She had no answer, like, so things like this is where the act would work if in case we had the counselors, we had the family welfare experts, and we had all this kind of backup, which would make the act work. But all in all, it's a really good act. It's a very simple act. It is a non-penal act which women really, really would like. If we had the protection officer with a little backup, and the government actually really talks like this, it's a 10-year-old act, but I still have people who have never heard of it, or who don't know all its provisions. And the government, in the act itself, has said, one of the sections, shall have radio talk, shall have TV talk, shall put up hoardings. Have any of you seen a hoarding on domestic violence in Goa?
On the radio, yes.
On the radio, I have done a few, yeah, but how many really we have? It's radio. Or like Doordarshan has, not really sufficient, because then you can't, because sometimes there's a half-an-hour program where you can't really explain and show the forms and tell them how to take market ticket, etc., etc. But it can become effective if one is used, if women, if of course we make these functionaries work, we make the police and other people who throw their hands up, the minute women go to the police station and says he's beating me up and it's domestic violence, oh BDO, like, but they won't, actually the police should assist the woman, should tell her of her rights, should explain the Domestic Violence Act, should tell her that maybe she can also file a criminal case, which is also there. She can file 498A, which is dowry harassment. They do nothing of this. They just like, video protection officer, please go there, he will do the rest. So, and these things do not work if all of us do not take it. So one of the things that I would always say is, you yourself get empowered about the law in order to help others, and tell them that it is available. And the second way, all of us obviously here to see who are already in some kind of social groups and organizations, we should demand from the government, like elections is here, of course, too late. full-time protection officers. So I mean, when you have 1,000 protection officers, I don't know how good they are, but at least they have put their money where their mouth is, in the sense that full-time 1,500 is a good enough number, and I'm quite sure there are strategic locations where they could have access to them. And in the full-time means at least Saturday, Sunday, and if they are working for a salary, I'm quite sure that we can call them up a bit and say why aren't they, doing the job that they do. So the second area where I really would hope that all of us would work is still demand, as a group, as a collective, maybe suggestions could come, from this thing. What we could do to really make it work is even a single signature campaign, or letters to the editor, or any of you are part of any organization that you know of that could add pressure to make the domestic violence work. So thank you. I'm open to questions, and then maybe if it's not too much, then the second part of the session, which Nilanpur says, which I could do a brief thing of filing of FIR and criminal complaints. But yes.
You said the DV Act covers sexual abuse, sexual violation, including forcible sex. How does that sit with the whole marital rape?
Yes, so that has always been the thing. They did say here, so marital rape is not recognized under 376, and it would be, so you cannot file it under 376, but you would only be able to say that use it as a form of one of the abuses to come under the purview of the act. So you can claim sexual abuse, but still now not.
So there's no criminal procedure covering.
Not yet. And even this, I've not had really people who have come under, the only cases that have come under sexual abuse under the DV Act is forced pornography, but I'm quite sure it exists because they talk about it, but they don't want to say it. They wouldn't want to put it down.
They don't recognize it themselves. They don't think there's anything wrong.
Yes, I guess. Yeah, obviously, because for them to even come forward, and I'm telling you, they come battered, but they say, don't put him in. Still that part about that thing, and they're so stuck onto tradition. Sometimes you question women who have come, they still do, certain of the customs where you ask for the same husband for 7 lives and all. And you just even trigger to ask them, say, you really want the same guy who's battering you up? And they haven't even thought of it, because there's so much seeped into that. And of course, the Catholic Church and all these ones would say what God has put together, no man should go asunder. So they still don't have divorce, but they would allow you to have an annulment under the canon law. So it's been difficult, but at least we have a law. At least we have. I'm saying something better than nothing. I told you, after 1 year we had a celebration, but now this thing has crept in of women abusing the law quite often. The same thing has started with 498A, where the judges have begun to believe it's being abused. Sexual harassment at the workplace. Now with the Chief Justice of India under a cloud, immediately thoughts again, whisper that really could it be true? So this thing of women coming up with false stories and abusing the laws are surfacing. Now, frankly, I would also say that I won't say that there are no cases of abuse or misuse, but one would have to look at percentages. And I always start my presentation by saying, if there are women in the audience, or largely when I do trainings for not this kind of group, but in the villages, to say, please don't abuse and make any kind of a false complaint, because then it throws all other genuine cases into jeopardy, or being questioned by the courts, where they say, look at for higher level of proof for any kind of case. So but this thing has pretty much crept in, disbelief of a woman, and that's really sad, because specifically in cases of domestic violence, there is not possible to have proof unless you have really black marks or photographs. Now women are becoming quite smart, so if you have a injury, they have taken photographs and they have kept it. They have been able to actually copy the chats of extramarital affairs of the husband and various other things, where it's been, at least you can have, otherwise it's all becomes suspicion, or even the court thinking the woman is imagining this extramarital till you can bring, what is the proof? How do you catch him? You can't catch him in action very largely. So things like this, like a chat, or maybe the phone getting engaged for many hours, you can bring phone records and show a particular number repeatedly. It was all indirect methods of standard of proof. But honestly, please, wherever, don't file false complaints, because exaggeration sometimes takes place, because like even the woman who comes to you says that like if she's been like beaten up maybe like 15 days, maybe she would say like every day or something, because in this way she sometimes also is wondering whether you yourself will believe her. So maybe sometimes they tend to exaggerate or something like this. But I suppose with if you question her and do it in a sensitive manner, you would really come with the truth of what exactly she's trying to say. So, yes.
Two things. One you said is, does the woman have to have proof that she's been abused or something like that, or the child just takes it?
So largely, as I told you, the its level of proof is not like in a criminal case, which is beyond reasonable doubt. It would be like in a civil case, which the word they use is preponderance of probability. It basically means that it is probable enough. So the courts like, so normally, for example, see, even if in case in a criminal case, women have brought the abuse in a court on a CD, like his abuse of bad words. Now, if it was a criminal case, you would have to go through the laws of evidence, which would mean a 65B certificate to show that it is his voice, to show that it is recorded, to show that that recording from her phone is not being tampered with and things like this. But the courts in cases like this wouldn't look for such very strict laws of evidence as in the level of criminal. So if in case a woman says this is his voice, this is his abuse, courts have looked at it and considered. Some judges are looking for higher level if that is the only bit of proof perhaps. So yes, she would need proof, but not of the level of very high proof.
So these two things are not lost here. Secondly, you said is that normally the government or the law says, the article says that you have to have a woman judge presiding.
That is not as per the section, that is as per the Supreme Court judgment.
What I'm trying to say is that court case, is it an open court or is it a closed court?
So it's a closed court, what they call in-camera trials. So therefore, it is when you say in-camera, means basically not in front of the public. But whereas the normal CRPC says all trials should take place in open court.
But she's only giving evidence in the closed room and the rest of the public can
No,
hear?
the respondent, no public can hear. So nobody else is there.
So nobody
Judge, yes. Only the judge, the steno, she can ask her, like she wants her counselor or someone to be there with permission of the
Basically,
court.
it's a closed court.
Yes.
So she can lie or whatever. I mean, she can cook up things.
She can cook up, but then it is also cross-examination, right? I mean, she would be subject to cross-examination where you can disbelieve.
Can the other party question them?
Yes, of course. So, of course, the respondent first and foremost replies to her allegations, and in normal course he would deny it because his advocate would also say deny it. And then if she says, for example, injury, and I was beaten up on Diwali day, let's assume, because sometimes she doesn't put a date. And you can prove that, in fact, on Diwali day she wasn't even at home and she was very clearly in Bombay or something like that. You can bring that and prove her statement wrong. But if she has an injury which she has photographed, and she's clicked a photograph of it on a phone, and she puts it before the court on a CD, the court might just accept it because they say, with her whole photo, face, etc. Why would she take, unless your allegation is that she beat herself. She created the injury herself in order to create false evidence against me, which looks rather far-fetched, but that could be his defense.
But the lawyer can argue the case.
Yes, of course.
Can
And have thrown out complaints as being false also. Many complaints as being false. Which I sometimes think that judges are becoming, as I say, nowadays, initially when the law was in force, they were trained to say accept the woman. But with this thing creeping in of women filing false complaints, the judges are looking for higher levels of proof and have found complaint being false and hence rejected. Entire complaints rejected, which is sadly, in my opinion.
If the judge finds the complaint was false, does it become criminal against the woman?
No, there is no criminal. There's clearly in the act that she cannot file. Like in the Sexual Harassment Act, there is that they can, not only proceed against her for filing a false complaint or whatever, but in the Domestic Violence Act.
Thank you.
I have a question about these protection officers.
Yes.
I mean, even you kept referring as he. I'm just wondering if the first point of contact is a woman. Is there any rule like you also hire?
I said he here because I think most of the videos in Goa are male, and therefore it is also the second part which is really bad, because again, if you're saying woman judge, women steno, women thing, and then you have the first point of contact as a video who's a male, so he would have to be extra sensitive. Now in the rest of the country, when they appointed protection officers, what they did was women and child department and all women protection officers. So here not, but there are some BDOs who are women, just happen to be. So, but not all the BDOs. Like for example, MAPSA, the only two BDOs are both male.
So there is no set of competencies or training.
They did train them. In fact, they had trainings for them right when the act started. You know, I mean, when it came in force, a lot of women's groups, they took it upon themselves to say, now, okay, fine, you have these male videos, let's at least train them. They also had trainings for the judges, because again, though you have female judges, not all of them are sensitive. We have such terrible judgments and, you know, rejection of complaints. In fact, I think there's one female judge in MAPSA who's had the history of throwing out maximum amount of cases, because she in turn has got a domestic violence case against her, filed by her sister-in-law, you know, for harassing her, and yet she continued to be a judge. And therefore, with that kind of a attitude that if her sister-in-law can file what she thinks a false complaint, she kept rejecting a lot of domestic violence cases. So it's not very perfect. The rest of the country has tried its best to put women protection officers, because as you said, the first point of contact should be the ones who are sensitive, and hopefully you can understand another woman. But in Goa, not so. So because I think majority of them.
Because I I also know somebody who was just a master's in law, had some connections, became a protection officer. But because she was a women protection officer, she couldn't do her own duties properly. Yeah,
Where in Goa?
No, not here, in a different state.
She couldn't do her duties properly because
Of the same challenges that any woman faces. Getting to a point, being dependent on something and having a...
Yeah.
I was just curious if there is...
it is challenging, because really even time constraints also would be. I mean here the video you can forget. But as I tell you, the minute they come and I know 2 hours, and like we are in court literally from 10 to 5. Like I'm saying maximum say 4:30. High court starts 4:30. By the time I come back to my office 5. So if I just even have a half an hour breather, and then like everyone starts piling in for their cases, and if I have to take one woman who's going to take 2 hours, it's also not fair, because then I'm trying to hurry her up and tell her story fast, because I have a bunch of people waiting outside. So it's not really the best. And and she's come from far, so I can tell her come another date, which is another date, except my Saturdays perhaps, which is 2 Saturdays of the month which court is not working. So even for a sensitive lawyer, it's not very easy. Much more for a person. And quite often these are the cases who don't pay also. So I mean you really need a sensitive lawyer to say, okay, fine, she's not going to pay fees in the first place. Of course, you get tamri bhaji and you get drumsticks and you get cashew nuts and all of these things, which are also very sweet. But in terms of time, can I give 2 hours vis-a-vis a person who's paying? This is something also a lawyer would calculate. The second thing is also on the legal aid panel. There are not only women lawyers on the panel, and you can't ask, I want only a woman lawyer. So, to have sensitive male lawyers on the panel who will defend your rights is also quite a challenge, because most guys say, oh God, not another domestic violence matter, when they get it allocated to them. Like I know my juniors, for example, 5 of them, and I've trained them that all of them have to be on the legal aid panel, because they need to give back to society. So all of them are on the legal aid panel of all the courts. So, but I still know that they get very excited when they get a criminal case, because they are basically criminal lawyers and challenging, and we're going to fight this is our defense. But the minute they get a domestic violence matter, it's like, oh no, it's like, even though they're sensitive, I know the tone that they're not very happy to deal with a woman who's quite often not even sure what she wants. So it's challenge right through. But it is a good law, and I think it was promulgated to help women who live in such situations, and I think it should, work the way it was intended to. in the no, then you would use IPC. That's the same for the men. If they face domestic violence, so often the question I get in a largely male crowd, then what about domestic violence of women against men? So they don't have a specific law. So IPC has got many sections that you would be able to do.
What would be the situations under which the respondent can actually turn the case around, against the woman by putting certain claims on her, like saying that
Adultery. Yes, of course. Can. I told you he gets a chance to respond. So, like for example, there was a case wherein the woman demanded literally, he was earning some 30,000 and she said she wants 20,000 of the salary, of his salary, which in normal course maybe the courts would, because she had the thing. And clearly she was having an adulterous relationship and openly so. So if he says, why should I, allow this type of thing to and he was able to prove the adultery, the court found that, why should he then give her this kind of thing? But he should give her the child because she was not what the court felt, living as a wife, and therefore why should he, if she's having an adulterous relationship, I'm not inclined to that.
so he was basically allowed to physically or literally get away.
Is he allowed to physically abuse her?
In that case, he got away.
Yeah, in a sense, got away meaning, but of course, it got away from paying the maintenance to her, only maintenance. But then she got, other rights perhaps she can't throw her out of the house because that's the marital home. She would get custody of the child because the child was minor. He would only get visitation, but maintenance the court said no. So he was able to get certain amount of things.
So under what situation will the children be taken away from?
The children, in most cases, largely are with the mother because she's the best guardian. If same way you can show one is mental illness, where the children are under threat, so any kind of psychosis or which is where you can show, and courts have taken away children, bipolar, motherhood bipolar, and was dangerous to the child. In cases even of adulterous relationship, if you can show that the well-being, large and short, and the welfare of the child, well-being of the children. So is every time seeing a new person in the house when she's bringing a number of men or adulterous relationship can have a negative impact on the child, the court would not grant her custody. But mental illness has been a very large part of mostly where the husbands have, that's a normal defense, that she is bipolar, she's schizophrenic, she's this, she's that.
What kind of proof is required to?
Well, if we are claiming a thing as serious as a mental illness, then you would need a doctor for that. Because otherwise you can't just say, oh, I feel she's crazy, which most people do. And I remember there was this one case which I did of custody of a child, where the husband did not only say that she's bipolar, but he was able to convince a psychiatrist to, because he was very eloquent, he spoke and said, oh, she does this crazy thing, she just gets up at night, she yells at me, she one day flung the baby and all kinds of things, which listening to the husband, I don't know, he just thought that why would the husband complain about it. The doctor gave a certificate that she's bipolar, and she was a professor of English literature and has just conducted lectures, and she's absolutely not bipolar. But with this certificate, initial court said, well, right now I have a certificate of bipolar, I'm not willing to give you custody. Then of course we had to wait for a little while and bring all her proofs from her colleagues to say she just finished lecture, she got 120 students under her. This is absolutely not, and to show that he has not done the various tests that you would do. They have their questionnaires and scales that you would have, at least basic to show initial bipolar, which he had not conducted, but basically on the say of the husband, which he says she gets up in the night and she does some crazy things or whatever he said bipolar. So it is possible, and in fact Supreme Court constantly in one of the judgments has said this is often a thing of the husbands to bring this kind of thing to claim that they're mental. And women do get into, sometimes you have postnatal depression. I've had cases so many times, and then postmenopausal depression, all kinds of things. That's not a thing where she's incapable of looking after a child. But if it leads to mania or something, then of course the courts would, in the interest of the children, deprive. But he can get visitation rights, and I think most courts always get visitation rights unless again he is alcoholic and dangerous to the child, where the courts would not give him visitation rights. Or vice versa.
You see, the law covers physical and mental cruelty. I think human beings not being the most evolved. I mean, people have altercation in their relationships with. I mean, lots of it could construe to be an emotional cruelty. How does court?
Yes, but as I told you,
see the
not
difference?
many people just, I can imagine every time you hear this, yeah, it would be to that extent which you can't bear it. Because both ways, women also throw a lot of things at things, but it's taken in that spirit that all marriages are not perfect. I've often heard this. I mean, which couple don't fight and which thing doesn't at the end of the day. But I don't think that, okay, he yelled at her that, okay, fine, I'm going to file a DV case. Not happen. It's like with repeated, constant badgering, constant demeaning her, constantly undermining her work or
A
something.
random one-off statement doesn't.
Yeah, it would.
The question was a random one-off comment. Doesn't.
Random one of, I don't think the court would grant, because and I first of all, I don't think also the women would come forward. I don't know. Very, very rare. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I have not had cases where like a random abuse which anyone can lose their temper. All of us are, as you said, human beings. At the end of a tired day, maybe you did say something amiss or whatever. But I think physical abuse would be a no-no, and not justified. However, I think because largely again, however angry a woman is, very difficult for her to, resort to physical abuse. One is because physically weaker. Sometimes the husband is normally also,
No,
taller.
it was
so
only
they-
a mental cruelty
Yes.
we were discussing. Right?
Yeah, so mental cruelty, one of one will not constitute. It would have to be a torture, repeated, thing that constitutes violence, unable to bear.
We said a living relationship has to be a significant amount of time. You said which is not a week, but is there a defined timeline to it?
They've not defined a time, but just use considerable amount of time. Because then sometimes it could be that you had, like even in a marriage, like I mean, the one case which everyone was battling, which came against women, at least in the sense was Batra versus Batra, wherein that was a unique case actually in the sense that though the law says residence of a husband, I mean, is whether it belongs to him or not. So in this particular case, the house belonged to the in-laws, and therefore they were successfully able, when the wife claimed for that house, the in-laws were successfully able to convince the court that it's their house and why should they give it to the daughter-in-law. Now, you use a section, you would say that the law says whether it belongs to you or not. But she didn't live in that house. They had a fight on the honeymoon. And and therefore you haven't even lived. So you can't use analogies like those. You would have to have lived in that house and been taken there and, as his wife. So lived in the nature of marriage would be considered. So sometimes you don't get married, maybe you've lived just 1 week of marriage, but like you've had a 1 year of living, which the court would then consider all that part. It's all very subjective and depending on the family. Yeah. So 5-minute break and then